All right, if we look at our page here inside of a web browser, so let's jump back here to our Finder, and we're going to open up our index.html page inside of a web browser and see what that looks like. You'll notice there's nothing here because all we have right now in our code is just a bunch of empty sectioning tags, sections, sides, divs, headers, navs. So there's actually no content inside of this, and that's just fine. So before we add all the content in here, we want to lay out the CSS side of this to kind of get the structure of our web page to come together. So we're going to bounce over here to our CSS sheet, and right now the CSS sheet is just completely empty, which is good. And we're going to add one piece to this CSS sheet before we ever even get started, and that's what's known as a CSS reset. You'll remember from the CSS tutorials, the intro to CSS tutorials, that a lot of those tags have default settings applied. For example, the header 1 tag is big and it's bold and it's 3 times as big as a paragraph, and the div sum tags have margins and paddings applied to them by default. The list tags have bullets, etc., etc. So there's all this default CSS being applied to tags. And while that's good in some instances, a lot of the web browsers have different CSS that as their defaults. So you can't really rely on a certain amount of margin or a certain amount of space that's applied consistently across all of the browsers. So a common thing to do on the web is to use what's called a CSS reset. I'm just going to go over here to Google here, and we'll do a quick search for a CSS reset. There's many variants of a CSS reset floating out of there on the web. One of the more popular ones, and kind of a guy who pioneered some of this, is this Eric Meyer right here. So we're going to come into his and click on his website, and we'll scroll down a little bit, and you can see all of this code right here. There's just a bunch of CSS. You really don't even need to worry about what any of this does. All this does is it essentially takes all of the defaults that are being applied to a lot of the tags and sets them to 0. So after applying this CSS reset, I'm just going to copy all of this code. You can just Control-C to copy all of that. And you jump back over inside of here, and we'll Control-V to paste all that. And I'm going to zoom out here. You can see it just added all sorts of CSS up here at the top of the website. And what this is doing is just overriding everything. So we're back to 0 essentially. And this will help fix problems between the web browsers that are out there, between Explorer and Firefox and Chrome. So it kind of evens the playing field. So once we've added a CSS reset, then we can go ahead and start from there and start to build in our web page. Another popular reset, there's a few out there. One's called the normalize. You might want to Google for that one. But we'll stick with this one and continue on. Important part that you'll notice is this section in the reset adds some additional things for HTML5 tags. So it sets a lot of those HTML5 tags that we used. We used the section, the nav, we used header, and we used, let's see, we're going to use article. It sets all those to display as blocks. So that's one thing to notice about this reset. Okay, so we're going to essentially be doing all of our code down here on line 46 and from there on down. So this is kind of a lot of CSS code, and it's going to get in the road of the work that we'll be doing. So I'm going to use one of the commands of my text editor here just to clean things up. I'm going to take all of this code, and I'm going to come up here and go to the bundles menu, go down to CSS, and if I cruise over here, whoops, there's this option that says Format CSS Compressed. And if I select this, it just takes all that CSS and munches it down a little bit smaller. So it essentially kind of takes everything and puts it on just a few lines there. And that's a little bit easier to read. So I'll leave all that up there at the top now. And I'm going to do a HTML comment at the very top, or not an HTML, a CSS-based comment. And I'm just going to say CSS reset so that I know that that's my reset. And we'll go from here. So in the next tutorial, we'll start doing our wireframe.